Hello and welcome back to another episode of ACRO's Good Clinical Podcast. I'm your host, Sophia McLeod. On today's episode of GCP, I'm joined by Jonathan Norman, the Director of Localization Services at YPrime, and Laura Russell, the Senior Vice President, Head of Data and AI Product Development at Advarra. Jonathan and Laura are here to discuss how they're using AI to transform today's clinical operations. Our conversation focused on how AI can be used to improve protocol design, how it can drive efficiency in the localization process, and how it helps to modernize clinical operations to expand access to trials and get treatments to patients sooner. Enjoy. Jonathan and Laura, thanks so much for joining me. Today, we are talking about what else? AI and ML in drug development and the ways that the industry can leverage AI to expand capacity and reach more patients. So I'm very excited to have both of you here today. I figured, Laura, maybe I'll start with you. And Jonathan, please feel free to jump in and we'll just kind of pass these questions around. But Laura, I would love from your perspective if you could just tell us, what are some of the most promising ways that you're seeing AI be used right now to improve protocol design and make clinical trials more efficient?
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. So I think, when I look at different ways that AI can be used, it's the possibilities are just plentiful, to say the least. But I really look at the opportunity to rethink how we create protocols and how we operationalize them. Today, protocols are static documents. Every time you make a change or an amendment, it's a manual update, and then all the downstream work requires manual updates too. But with AI, we can transform those static documents to digital dynamic documents. And that allows us to extract data from these protocols at a scale with quality and integrity that is critically needed within clinical research. And then the future is then digitized protocols where these data and all of these attributes can optimize future design by virtue of being able to have aggregated data that is reflective of all the trials that came before them. This can help also improve feasibility. And then ideally in the visionary state is really to automate workflows once the trial's underway. So as changes come through, you can see those changes propagate through the system automatically without manual edits and an incredible amount of human capacity in order to see that through. So when I look at AI and then the tools that are available to us, we can unify data, we can inform better design, and then we can also automate workflows to improve feasibility, forecast risk, and make operations smooth and efficient. And I think the last piece is AI allows us to do this together. So we're not in a vacuum. And so importantly, through our Thought Leadership Council, we're also making sure that we create collaboration and a mechanism to bring all of the stakeholders together. And the ability with AI and data confidentiality solutions allows us to share data and support real-world execution and define problems, but with all the stakeholders involved and heard. So understanding operational impact elements and design decisions from a site perspective, from a sponsor perspective, and then also bringing in those AI technology developers helps us influence governance and expertise that's needed to scale this responsibly. So at the end of the day, protocol design becomes cross-functional, enabled by AI, and it allows us to bring development, operations, and technology together. And that becomes that connective tissue and the intelligence that helps us build towards the future, where trial design is not only more efficient and executable, but it's also resilient and it's informed by our past experience.
No, that's awesome. You mentioned, how we're sort of unifying the data. And I wanted to touch on that a little bit more. So can you tell us a bit about how you're seeing this emerging AI technology and that idea of the unified data ecosystem helping the industry address some of those long-standing foundational challenges that we see in clinical research?
Absolutely. So I think we're probably all somewhat familiar with the commercialization and availability of large language models. And so what we're doing and what I think AI can really unlock for us is building on top of the large language models to extract, structure, and standardize all the data that is connected through a clinical trial. And so what we're doing is we're leveraging those large language models, but then we're making domain-specific algorithms that sit on top of that. Because in clinical trials, we speak a very unique language than maybe the broader universe. And so we need to make sure that we translate that those clinical trial data points into a way that we understand that within our industry, but then also making sure that we solve for where AI can generate hallucinations, misunderstand when we say words like arm or blinded. That those things are in a large language model and current state do not translate, if you will, to the same way that we would use them in the construct of a clinical trial. So we're using these different attributes and elements within AI to create the structured data set, but we're also then using mechanisms of different ontologies that are used to standardize the language that's in each individual protocol. So individual sponsors may articulate a clinical procedure or a diagnosis or assessments within their own internal language and phrasing. But we use standardized languages that are available for those types of things, and we then transform the raw inputs in a highly efficient way into a structured data set. And so by virtue of that, we then have a transformed data set. There's no identifiers, if you will, or indications of personal style or individual phrasing of how you would articulate something because it's all mastered against that unified language. And so then by virtue of that and additional innovation within data sharing, we're able to hash out anything that would be considered an identifier, like an ID number, a sponsor name, anything related to the investigational therapy. All of that information can be hashed. We can surface that in a clean room or other mechanisms of data sharing that you can join those attributes together because they're all unified to the same language. So we're leveraging a couple different elements of AI, but also then putting that on top of incredible technology that allows for data sharing, and that allows for that interoperability between multiple stakeholders while also protecting the confidential elements that are critical to the individual sponsors.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like the possibilities here are endless. So this is very exciting. Jonathan, I
Absolutely.
want to pull you in a little bit as we think about AI's role in the operational side of trials. And, I think everyone listening knows this, but clinical trials are global. And so how can we use AI in translation processes to assist with improving speed and also accuracy, I think, in multi-language clinical trials?
Yeah, absolutely, because this is such a hot topic right now, not just among translation providers, but also among stakeholders like sponsors or other parties that buy the translations. And the reality is that AI absolutely can drive efficiencies in the translation space, but maybe not in the way that people immediately think of. So when people think of AI in translations, the first thought is often, well, won't this just replace those human translators? And I get that, because tools like ChatGPT or Copilot sound incredibly human. They use grammatically correct sentences, they understand your prompts, and they respond in a way that feels conversational and fluent. So it's easy to assume that we now have these perfectly literate and multilingual machines. But the translation work required in clinical trials is far more nuanced than any general conversation. So, in my personal opinion, we're not yet at a point where AI can consistently create those culturally sensitive and accurate translations that meet the really high bar set for collecting valid patient data across diverse populations. But that said, that's not the end of the road for AI within this particular space. In fact, far from it, because what many people don't realize is that the moment that actually a human translator sits down to write in the target language, is just the tip of the iceberg. There are so many manual and behind the scenes tasks that are essential to getting a high quality translation. And many of those are time consuming and ripe for automation. For example, preparing source materials for translation or generating reviewer commentaries are areas where AI can already lend a hand. But to me, that real sweet spot is in processes like migration, which in the core world means taking these existing translations, whether they've come from copyright holders or from previous work that a sponsor has done, and moving them into electronic formats. And historically, this has been a challenge because, on the one hand, you have linguists trying to work in technical file formats, which requires a lot of safeguards due to the complexity of those files. On the other hand, you maybe have technical teams who are handling the files as tech experts, but they maybe don't speak all of the languages, which can lead to errors in text placement or formatting or other discrepancies within those files. And that's a problem because these files drive the system outputs, which are then used for regulatory submissions. And so if they're wrong, you end up in long, costly review cycles that can lead to delayed approvals and to delayed site activation. And this is where AI really shines in the world of localization, because migration isn't about generating new content. It's about placing existing translations and applying the proper formatting and structure into a technical system. And at YPrime, we actually built our own AI-powered tool specifically to automate this process. And the results have been significantly reduced timelines, higher quality outputs, and all with minimal risk, because those AI-driven steps are still followed by the same human-led quality process that was already in the equal localization process. So it's been a true win-win for us, really. Faster timelines, better quality, and safer implementation of translations in our global trial projects.
One thing that just keeps coming up as we talk about AI and you talk to different stakeholders in the industry is this consideration in my mind of like replacing a core function. And there's this theme I keep pulling on with that. And like it's not about replacing for me, right? It's about expanding that capacity and expanding your access to, I'm going to use the word intelligence, but it's really that access to the intelligence where you can deploy that extra capacity to the manual, very nitty gritty, if you will, tasks, the things that use your high powered, high expertise talent, human talent to focus on the big meaty problems and the things that need to get done and leverage AI to get through those administrative process-based tasks that you can train against. And so it's about expanding your capacity, enabling more scale as opposed to replacing. And it's just one of these things that keeps coming up. And I feel like I'm a broken record sometimes when I say that to folks. I'm like, no, I'm not. This is not about replacing. This is about opening a whole world of possibility that, or scale that we just haven't been able to tap into.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, that leads to two different avenues because you have this idea of what's a value add task? What is something that absolutely must be done by a human because it involves decision making and, all these other high risk activities? And what is simply a task that needs to happen to facilitate something else, but it is ultimately at its core a manual process that just leads to something else? And are those the things that we can reducing the process so that humans are doing more value add work rather than work which maybe is better suited to machines overall? And I think the worry with that is that people often feel like they're going to be replaced. And that puts up these walls of fear of using AI in the process. And, it is something which you can resonate with as an individual. You don't want to be worried about your job. But really it is that message that although you say you sound like a broken record, I think those of us who are looking to implement AI in our processes and our organizations have to really beat that drum. Because until we pull back on the fear that people have about their jobs, I think you will have some resistance for the people that are in the trenches doing the work, that they do have a concern that they're going to be replaced, which, as you very rightly said, is actually not what the majority of people who are looking at the sensible deployment of AI are actually trying to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think it definitely bears repeating. But Jonathan, I wanted to sort of drill down on something you were starting to mention, and that's the idea around localization. Can you explain some of the benefits of expanding access to trials through modernizing eco-localization capabilities?
Absolutely, because I think that regardless of any political views or what's happening in the world right now, it's very hard to argue with the fact that a more diverse and representative population in clinical trials ultimately leads to better science. It just does. And one of the most effective ways to increase that participant diversity is by improving the linguistic accessibility of our trials. So making sure that people can actually understand the materials and take part wherever they are in the world. And this same principle applies if you're expanding into underrepresented countries. If you want those populations to engage meaningfully, the materials must be available and culturally relevant in their native language. But the problem that sponsors come up against is that translation still takes time. And let's be honest, sponsors aren't going to slow down their timelines anytime soon. In fact, we're seeing increased pressure to be even faster in the work that we do. And that's where those of us in the translation space come in, because we sit at that intersection between global sponsors and the local communities that stand to benefit from more inclusive trials. So in my view, that gives us a responsibility to explore every opportunity looking for efficiencies. And that doesn't mean we should adopt every tool or every trend just because it's available. Some things won't work, and some things just won't meet that high quality bar that we as an industry set ourselves. But we owe it to the science and to the patients to keep looking seriously at every possibility for doing things better, faster, and more inclusively without compromising on quality. And right now, that topic is AI.
And there's a point that you make that it's so interesting around, we want to make sure that we have representative populations, and AI allows that enables that scale in an incredible way. And as I've been working with Advarra and building out our products around data and data access, one of the big elements there is we want to make sure we're meeting our different stakeholder populations where they are, right, in their data journey, in their AI journey. And I think that's critically important to really augment, because that's how you are more inclusive, if you will, with all of the different stakeholders in the industry, and you offset those concerns or worries around data sharing, confidentiality, but then also like job replacement, job security. And so, as you know, Jonathan, as you're talking here, it's also when you think about wanting to have representative populations within your trials, you also need to meet the patients where they are to enable that access. And I think that's one of the things that's going to be such an unlock with AI and clinical research, because one of the foundational challenges is just that ability to tap into broader populations and enable coordination that's, I mean, it's not simple. The operations are by no means simple of running these trials and connecting all the different technologies and, like you said, not forsaking quality along the way. And of course, everyone wants to accelerate the pace. And so I think it's just such an interesting moment that by virtue of leveraging these emerging technologies and expanding our capacity, we can realize the mechanism of acceleration isn't necessarily taking things out of the design because they're too complicated, but rather leveraging AI to make it possible to meet the patients where they are, enable the stakeholders and the operators to have the capacity to execute on the designs and the operational constructs without having to make trade-offs. And I think historically, as an industry, we've had to make trade-offs because it's complicated. It is critical to get it right, right? These are humans and that we're intervening on. And so it's this amazing intersection for us now to not have to make trade-offs, but rather expand in a really meaningful way.
And I think what you're saying about trade-offs is definitely the right way to look at this, Laura, because if you speak to any translation provider out there who works in this space, they will tell you they have had projects or studies come across their desk where they started with what would have been a really large and a really inclusive language list, focusing on lots of different populations around the world. Then they've seen timelines, and then suddenly languages start being removed because within the time frame that is available, they can't squeeze in all of that localization. And it's never your underrepresented populations that seem to be maintained in those trials. It's your European languages, it's your Spanishes, your Frenches, your Germans, those kinds of things. And so what you end up with is populations that are just repeating themselves in trials across the world because people are trading off with those time restraints that they have in their trials. And that's the thing with AI in this process. It's not creating something we didn't already have. It's not suddenly making translation into these languages possible. That's been possible for a long time. It is allowing us to be able to do things at a faster rate with a higher efficiency and a higher quality, which means those timelines reduce, mean that sponsors are able to keep more languages in that scope of work and ultimately deliver that trial to more populations around the world. And so I think it is through that removing the need to trade off and making it much more palatable to include all of this work in scope. That's what's going to drive us to a world in which we actually get the diversity we're looking for within our research.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you guys have already started going into the direction I was going to ask. But I do want to stay on this topic for a little bit as we think about driving efficiency, but also how we connect that back to the patient, as obviously, the patients are the center of what we do and how that impacts their experience throughout the course of the trial. So can you guys just talk a little bit more for me on, how using these new AI technologies, how they trickle down to benefits that the patients will see in the trial?
Yeah, I'd start with a little anecdote actually from a conference I was at earlier this year where I was on a panel talking about patient-reported outcomes and AI. I think everyone will recognize that AI has been a topic pretty much at every conference for the past 18 months. But again, yeah, this was being discussed there. And one of the panelists that was doing this alongside me was a patient representative. And he lives with a devastating illness. And he was incredibly candid and shared that he'd actually already outlived the life expectancy that he was given during his diagnosis journey. And being part of our industry, he really understood the value of patient-reported outcomes and the critical role that they play in our research. But for his condition specifically, there aren't any tailored measures, just generic tools that don't fully capture what matters most to patients like him in terms of quality of life or treatment impact. And then he said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since he said it. And he said that while he understands the skepticism around AI, and he even shares some of it himself, patients like him are dying without any real advances. So if there is a way, if there's any way to speed up the research to generate better outcomes or improve quality of life, we just have to try. And we can't wait around and hope someone else figures it out for us. And that really hit home because it was a call to action, not just to be open to AI, but to be responsible with it. We have a duty to patients to explore every tool, every innovation that could really make a difference. And we need to be bold. We need to be proactive. And we need to get our arms around this technology to use it for good. Because for some people, that clock really is running out.
I mean, that's spot on. And one of the themes is that we have to experiment, right? It's interesting to me as an industry where there is this hesitancy or skepticism. I think a healthy amount of skepticism is critical, but it's the underpinning is science, right? And so I look at the ability to be able to experiment with AI and identify meaningful and impactful use cases that accelerate the pace of research while maintaining quality. We are called to do that. That's critical for us to adopt that and at least try all of the different tools that are available to us to understand. We sit at an incredible, unique intersection of overseeing and ensuring compliant and safe conduct of the studies and how they're designed in pursuit of patient safety, as well as achieving the outcomes of the trial. But then on the other side, we've spent an incredible amount of time investing in site and sponsor technology so we can bring those different pieces together and create that connectivity. So when I look at the opportunity of how it ultimately impacts patients, it's really breaking down the complexity and simplifying the things that otherwise just take an incredible amount of human time. And so delivering continuous operational insight to the designs that then reduce patient burden, reduce site burden, reduce the friction of being able to meet patients where they are because the trial logistically is not feasible and or it's in conflict with all of the other things that are happening within a patient's medical and care journey. So I think about AI being able to more accurately forecast enrollment and feasibility by comparing protocols against thousands of historical designs, about creating protocols to be dynamic so they're easily deployable and reach multiple patient populations in a much simpler way. And then being able to select those sites and activate those sites in a way that hasn't been done before. We can align capabilities and capacity based on protocol specific requirements and as well as activation velocity, enabling that, getting all of the paperwork through to enable the activation of those sites, the engagements with the patients, because you are engaging with patients at a very unique snapshot and moment in time of their journey. And so it's critical to be able to have those sites available, the protocols operationalized and ready to go, because you'll miss that opportunity. So ultimately I come back to instead of going from episodic problem solving and this orchestration of very complex logistics, we go to a digital transformation of the lifeblood of a clinical trial, which is the protocol. And this benefits every stakeholder, our sites, our clinical operations teams, our technology teams, and then ultimately the patients who get to realize the benefit of seamless and highly optimized design that meets them where they are.
I think that's so important what you're both saying, and I think it kind of blends into the last question I have for you, and maybe Laura, I'll start with you on this one, and then Jonathan, I'll let you finish it up for us. But I'm just thinking about others in the industry who are, working through this AI journey, and wondering if you guys have any advice for others as they kind of work to expand how we're using AI in clinical research. Any little wisdom, tips, any calls to action, however you want to leave off, I think is good. But any advice for folks listening?
Absolutely. My advice that I'd offer, first and foremost, is, is be curious,
Mhm.
experiment. Take even engaging with AI outside of your work life and explore what could be possible in your everyday life and how you can apply value to yourself as an individual. And I think, personally for me, that's one element of how I continue to explore and understand the power of large language models and generative AI. So I think that's number one. When we then translate that into your work life, if you will, you're thinking about development of AI solutions or leveraging AI within your workflow. Don't start with the algorithms. Start with the architecture. You want to realize the full value. The most important investment you can make is really mastering the intersection of your originating data or your source documents and mastering that into a digital and structured way, because that then becomes your translation source, your cross-functional coordination source. And then that's what powers that responsible automation and drives the repeatable intelligence for all. So I think AI is most effective when it's translating the messy, the manual, the complicated into structured, as well as automating procedures and processes that are well documented. And it's such an interesting intersection between taking something that's messy and not organized and structuring it, as well as taking something that's structured and process driven and connecting those dots. And that's what then you are able to tap into insights that you just weren't able to see, that weren't visible by the human eye. From there, you can do the work to unify and then create this digital fabric, this operational data fabric, if you will, and govern that. Then the other piece of that is we don't go alone. The complexity of clinical trials, it demands collaboration. Sites bring the executional lens. They understand how protocols work or don't in the field, in the real world. AI technology leaders, they're bringing the tools and the practices like model governance and machine learning operations and data harmonization. So they ensure that the AI and the underlying technology you're using performs as intended and within our domain. And I think it's critical that we have to bring these stakeholders together from the sponsors to the site to the technology providers so that we can have a shared vision for AI, as well as ensure the underlying technology and the data sources and unlock the full potential. And so it's collaborative. And we have at Advarra newly established a Council for Ethical AI in Clinical Trials because we strongly believe it's collaborative and we are dedicated to shaping the use of AI and emerging technologies in trials so that we can optimize and really harness the power and potential. And so I look at all of this together, and I think really the goal and our focus as an industry is we're not here to replace the humans. We're here to amplify operational foresight, reduce avoidable delays, and ensure development, operations, and technology are coming together and we're all working from the same fabric, not separate threads. Let's do it together and let's move clinical research forward. We want to do it fast, all day, every day, but we also want to do it smarter.
And I love the idea of working together and making sure that, we are not just doing the same thing that we've always done, just with an AI component. We are reimagining it and we're moving forward in a way which is better. But I think for me, in terms of the key bits of advice, perhaps that I would give to people is the first one is maybe a bit of a reality check, right? And it's that AI isn't just a buzzword. When you mention AI, I still see a few eye rolls, or I still see people say, "Oh, We're talking about this again at this conference. But let's be honest, it's not going away. And if you are not already seriously thinking about how you should be using it, not could, how you should be using it, you're kidding yourself. It's time to get on board and really think about how this can bring benefits to you, your people, your organization, your patients, whoever that might be. And again, bouncing off something that kind of Laura said there as well is, let's not just take the current process and automate it as it stands and shoehorn it into a process that has AI involved. Let's look at how we do things and let's reimagine the process. Let's take the bits that work. Let's get rid of the bits that don't work. Let's apply AI at sensible points so that we are, to use Laura's term, working smarter, not just differently. But I think the main thing which I would say to people, and which I think comes up in conversation all the time, is that we shouldn't get distracted by the big ticket items. And by this, I mean in our industry, we tend to search for that one big change that will unlock massive value everywhere. But the truth is that AI often isn't ready yet to take on those large central roles in clinical processes. What it is ready for is for the smaller stuff, for the supporting activities, the quiet, often overlooked tasks that, when improved, add up to a much leaner, more efficient and cost-effective workflow. So don't wait on the sidelines for AI to be able to do that one big thing you're looking for. Start using it now for the small things, and you'll start seeing real benefits a lot sooner than you think.
That was fabulous. I think those are two really good messages to leave off on. I hope our listeners, take all of that advice in and go forth and get creative or something with the AI. But I think there's a lot that you guys in the industry have done and a lot more to do. So I think this is a really exciting space. Everyone is talking about it, but there's a reason why. So thanks for joining. Thanks so much for tuning in to ACRO's Good Clinical Podcast, and a huge thank you to Laura and Jonathan for joining me. We'll see you all back here next week for another episode.